Assemblyman Brian Kolb says he's running for governor. He's on the line right now. Good morning, Brian. Thanks for coming on.
Well, good morning, and it's a pleasure to be on. Thank you very much.
Well, tell me, there's a lot going on, and even the governor's practices of hiring and who knows what that whole story is about, but being investigated by the FBI. There's the Caballeros issue. You got a lot to work with, I think.
Yeah, well, and that's not even counting the high property taxes, the Hunger Games approach to economic development, Hollywood tax credits in exchange for fundraising to the governor. So that's just the beginning. So it's going to be an interesting ride.
And of course, here in Utica and Rome and the Mohawk Valley, we're looking at investment into so many different things. We've had more money come into this area than we have seen. I can't ever remember. But we are looking at a nano facility we still don't have filled. And while we have been the recipients of this quote-unquote Hunger Games, it is odd. It's interesting how the governor's kind of taken away that money where you could bring the money home for your constituents, and instead he divvies it out at these events. It's quite interesting.
Well, and certainly that's part of the problem I've had with this whole approach is that, we have the regional economic development councils who are, charged with determining and scoring potential economic development projects for the region. Unfortunately, all the decisions are made by the Cuomo administration, and then they come out with these big pronouncements and look what I've done for you in each community throughout the state. And what I really try to remind people, ladies and gentlemen, although it's great, if you're a community that's getting some money in it, just remember this: it's all about taxpayer money, and is that the best way in the appropriate project to use the taxpayer funds? And I think that's really the underlying question: is the result really there based on the hoopla and the public relations?
Tell me your thoughts on the tax bill. Of course, the Senate has passed the federal tax bill. The Senate has passed it, and the House of Representatives is expected to pass it today. So that will go into play for New York. It's believed that could hurt a lot of people in New York because of our high tax situation. As governor, how will you address that? And can you change? I mean, you've been in Albany for a while. How do you change this high tax situation that we live in? And what will you do as governor?
Well, certainly, first and foremost, yes, I've been in Albany, but I've also been a voice of reason and trying to communicate that, we've got a spending problem, not a revenue problem. And that really is the fundamental issue. And state government and even Washington doesn't do a very good job of going back and reevaluating programs, where we're spending money. Is it the most economical use of taxpayer funds? Are there ways to make programs more efficient and still deliver much-needed services to those that need our services? And that's certainly an approach you have to take. That comes from the kind of my business mind side, which I spent more of my professional career in the private sector than in the public sector. And we've always offered alternatives in terms of budget preparations and trying to reducing spending, which is really has to be the goal. But really, the most amount of money we spend is in education and Medicaid if you look at overall taxpayer dollars. Having said that, we're spending literally millions and billions on economic development and tax credits for Hollywood, as I mentioned earlier, to the tune of $500 million. I think there should be no stone unturned to look at opportunities to save money, and that's where you begin. And certainly, local and state property tax burdens combined are one of the highest in the country. Our property taxes are still too high. That's a direct result of some of the mandates that come from Albany and Washington with no additional help to pay for it. So it's a cumbersome problem. It's not easy, and you really have to take pencil to paper and start evaluating every appropriation in the budget and making sure that whatever we are spending is on the best interest of the taxpayer.
I want to ask you about a couple of things that happened last week that I was quite surprised with. First of all, Let's start with, I found this to be very interesting, and it's going to come back to haunt him, whether he runs for governor again or runs for president of the United States. But the governor being asked about, by an NPR or a WAMC reporter, asked about if there's anything in particular that he's doing in his administration to prevent any of these sexual harassment or sexual assault cases. You heard his reaction. He basically scolded her and said she's part of the problem, wouldn't answer the question. That does not sound like a guy who's running for office.
Well, to be honest with you, for those that really know Andrew Cuomo the best, that's who he is. That's his real personality. And that, he's very vindictive for people that don't agree with him or speak out against him. We had a downtown revitalization grant awarded in my district last year, right in the city of Geneva, where my district office is, and I did not get invited to that announcement because I've been outspoken about how money is being spent by the governor.
Yeah.
And certainly his attitude with the reporter is totally unnecessary. All he had to do was just answer the question.
Right,
it wasn't a trap question. Karen DeWitt's one of the more respected reporters in Albany, but that's his personality. He's very defensive. He's very thin-skinned, and he's very sensitive when people start pushing him on what I would call hot-button issues.
It almost seemed the way you came off was a "How dare you?" question me. That's kind of how that sounded. I'm just saying it didn't sound good. The other is he came out and leaked a part of his State of the State that's going to be coming up after the holiday. And one of the things that I had issue with, of course, we're right in, here we are with Remington Arms in our backyard, and they are struggling. This whole issue of taking away the guns of someone who has been charged with domestic violence. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not coming out for domestic violence. I feel that anybody who hits a woman or anybody who hits their spouse is just a horrible person. However, we already have a system in place. If a judge feels that this person who has been charged is of danger to himself or others, the judge can order to have those guns taken away. But to make this automatic, I think takes the power away from the judge to be able to make the decision. What's your take on that story?
Well, certainly we haven't seen any of the details, but of course I'm always, one eye open when it comes to proposals that don't have specific language and how it's going to be implemented and executed. And certainly I share the same concerns because they're including misdemeanors. Well, what's the true definition of a misdemeanor?
Or an order of protection, which we know in family court, those things get handed out without due process.
That's correct. And due process is the key words here. Every citizen is entitled to a fair trial, fair hearing, and fair handling of the case. And we shouldn't just be automatically, putting something in place in law without having due process followed within our court system. And, when you talk about domestic violence for the last 5 or 6 years, we've been trying to get passed in the state assembly. It's called Brittany's Law, which is a registry for violent felony offenders. And it's passed overwhelmingly bipartisan support in the Senate. And I've written Governor Cuomo, how about trying to start here first, letting communities know where violent offenders are residing? Because we had a terrible murder here in my district several years ago as a result of a violent felon that the parties had no idea had that background. And that's a simple step that pretty much doesn't cost anybody anything to try to protect families, yet, the governor hasn't said anything or done anything on that issue. But this is about politics for him. This is about sound bites, and that's really public relations. That's really how Governor Cuomo operates, and that's why you're seeing some of these proposals being sort of floated ahead of time to see what sort of reaction there might be, and then they may adjust their language as they go forward.
You think you're going to be running against him? Or is he going to look towards the presidency?
Well, I think it's going to be him, but I do know that there is a little bubbling of the surface that he may not run if he really wants to run for president.
Right.
But what I will say, though, if he says he's going to run for re-election and announces that, then I would say he should, at the very same moment, tell the citizens of New York that if he does run for re-election for governor, and if he gets elected, which I hope he doesn't, but if he does, that he commits to serving out the full 4-year term and not run for president. And I think that's a fair request because we have our state is too complex, too big. We got a $150 billion budget that come 2019, our governor can't be running around the country, going to Iowa and all other places raising money for a presidential campaign. He's
already kind of doing that. I mean, trip to Puerto Rico. He went over to the Middle East. I mean, the governor's doing some traveling. There's no doubt about it. Assemblyman Brian Kolb, we appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you make some noise here.
Sounds great. And I wish you a very Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
All right, same to you. Thank you so much.
Sure thing.
Assemblyman Brian Kolb, who's running for governor of New York State.